Welcome to the Calibrate podcast, everybody. My name is Peter Kinmond, and joining me today is Rob Slifka. Hello, Rob.
Hello, hello.
And Sonya Green. Hello, Sonya.
Hi.
Rob and Sonya are two of the organizers from this year's Calibrate conference, and Rob helped initially create the conference last year. And we thought we'd sit down and talk a little bit about what it was like putting it on and some of the motivation. So why don't we just start with intros? Rob, do you want to say a couple things about yourself?
Yeah. I am currently the VP of Engineering at Sharethrough here in San Francisco at an ad tech company. I've been in management for just under 10 years or so, and I was also a engineer front-end desktop Java, which doesn't even exist anymore, to date you as to how long ago I was an engineer. But then a lot of back-end Java as well. But I've been really excited about managing people and leadership for the past 10 years or so.
Great. And Sonya, a little about yourself?
Yeah, I joined Calibrate last year as a speaker, speaking about cultural debt from my experiences going from being an individual contributor turning into a manager at a tech company. And after that experience and getting to know Rob, and the aim of the conference is so deeply something that appeals to me and I think is important, as Rob needed help this year, I got to join.
Great. So, Rob, I'll start with you. What did you think was missing sort of in the conference landscape that made you want to launch a conference like Calibrate, which for people who aren't familiar with it is geared at engineering managers, so specifically new engineering managers?
Some of it, I'll tell two sort of brief anecdotes. One is that I was actually having breakfast with one of the speakers that I won't say quite who yet. It wasn't Sonya, though. Quite a while ago, and we were just talking about life and careers and objectives and stuff and things we wanted to do for ourselves, and one of the things that I recall talking about is that that the challenge that I had in moving to leadership. I don't think I've told you this story yet, Peter. The challenge that I had in moving to leadership, in this sort of like figure it out for yourself, make all the mistakes yourself, not a lot of guidance, not a lot of material. I had great managers at the time, but not quite in the way that I think I needed to feel like I was being successful in that moment. And I wanted a way to help people with that. And the problem I had posed at breakfast was, it's, let's say that you sort of take this, from company to company, you're helping people in the single or maybe double digits, and that's your career, right? And so, I mentioned, how is it possible to sort of raise the impact that I could have, like to scale this desire to help people in making this transition. So that's one with respect to, my own sort of personal objective. With respect to conferences in particular, totally separate train of thought. We got together with some folks talking about a conference that we missed sponsoring. And that we really enjoyed, and kind of went around the table and talked about different topics that were of interest to us. And when the topic of engineering management was mentioned, it was one that, thinking back to that breakfast I had, putting those two things together, like, wait, of course, you could do, an event with, in the dozens or hundreds of people. And if you bring together really good people, really good speakers and content, it is a way to scale that desire to help people going through this transition. And so that was kind of the aha of like, wait a minute, this is the thing. Like, this is the thing I've been thinking about.
Yeah.
But being a serious introvert myself, I did not immediately jump to the idea of like, why don't you just put up on a conference and recruit speakers and get an event space? That was not like what I had thought the shortest path to increasing my impact would be.
Right. And Sonya, what about yourself? What was you were a speaker last year, and I saw you were great. What made you want to then sort of take over some of the running of the conference this year?
The thing that I spoke of previously of having that passion for wanting to bring help to people, I guess, is like a simplified and slightly Girl Scout way of saying it. But like, I've had personal experience. I've witnessed other people's, or like, observed other people's experiences of having a hard transition from individual contributor type person, or even before your company is ready to use that word, into either overt, like named management or implicit management.
Right.
And having experienced it myself, it just seems so important to all of these tech companies that are going through the same pains at the same time. And this seems like one of those, I'll use organizational debt of, if you're moving fast and you're doing stuff, this is one of the things that's easily a second tier priority.
Right.
People figure it out, it's going to be fine. There's nothing's perfect, but it seems like something that's been consistently left behind at many companies that I'd, interacted with, which thus makes it like a perfect place to get care mad, a perfect place to say like, oh, I can do something about this. This is the thing that that wants help. This area.
That's an interesting point. It does feel very much like an area that wants help, and I think a lot of people at the conference responded sort of in that way. It seemed like there was a lot more engagement than maybe a typical tech conference that I've attended. So for either of you, what do you think? Where do you think that feeling comes from? Why is there such a sort of a need for this knowledge right now?
Let's see. I'm thinking of two parts. One is more on an individual basis, and empathizing with each person who attended. I think when you start to become a manager, everything shifts. Your job, like what is important shifts. What shows you that you're doing well shifts. It moves from taking care and managing systems and code. I mean, I guess there's still some systems in the process way, but it's much more with humans. Mm-hmm. One of the talks that I really liked was Kalal's this year, talking about how humans are inconsistent. We just are, and that's fine. But it's a good way of thinking about how when the job shifts, you're asked to use these other skills.
Right.
And so that can feel very isolating. My experience was because I was at a tech company that was very familial, very family-like. My relationships with my coworkers changed.
Okay.
I didn't know how to deal with that very well. I'm your boss now, I guess. And on top of that being awkward, it meant that I had the same people who I would go to for with questions that I had. I didn't even know if it would be okay if I could talk about that kind of stuff.
Right.
Like it's like a specific problem to being new at it, but that's so isolating. So it's something that you can work through, but it'd be super cool if you didn't have to. So to get a bunch of people who have raised their hand to say like, this is something that I would like to be better at, and I care, and I know that I could use help on, is a really fantastic group, because it's like we've put a cone of silence over the whole room,
right.
And it's okay to say like, what I'm crap at. There's something that I really need to figure out, because there's an implicit understanding that everyone else is either struggling with the same thing or different things, or deeply motivated to help sort it out for everyone.
Right.
Yeah, I would definitely echo that. I think the number that I have is that you feel like you're with your people, or that you are represented if about, I think, a minimum of about 30% or so of the group is sort of like you in a sense.
Right.
And one of the challenges of traditional conferences is that you can go to a conference and there's 3 tracks. And a track can sometimes be synonymous with, well, this is really another conference.
Right, yeah.
Right, and if you're going to a track and there's a mobile, web and, native, these are 3 different careers you could have. And so with respect to Calibrate, we had a single track conference that was for a very specific audience going through a very specific challenge. And to Sonia's point, knowing that you were there with people who had raised their hand in a very similar way and said, I need help with this thing. It's okay to ask for help. And here we are in a room full of people. And when you turn to your left, you turn to your right at lunch or during the talks, it's people who had the same challenges as you. Then contextually, they're going to be a little bit different,
right?
But very similar sort of, uncertainty, feeling vulnerable, dealing with new and different situations. So with respect to the personal connection to the conference, I posit that for me, I feel the same way, that it was rare for me to feel like at previous conference type events that I was surrounded by people like me enough that I could be vulnerable with them.
Right.
There's another part of this too, which was how we orchestrated the conference.
Right.
Care was put from the get-go, from what I understand from the first conference. The idea was to have there be time for people to talk to each other. That this wasn't just sit in chairs in front of a person who talks to you in lecture style, and maybe you get to ask questions. It was, there was some of that, but also that the breaks were designed to be a little longer.
Yep.
There was time built in for people to, and also explicit encouragement on the part of, like, as part of the organization of this, that from this you should be, you can be garnering a network. You can be finding other people who you can connect with after this conference.
Right.
Which I think by even saying that out loud, even if that wasn't, if everyone wasn't comfortable with that or successful with that during the conference itself, I think back to the, it was kind of a happy hour after the proper talks were over, and how much conversation was happening. People sitting or standing and having animated conversations in twos or threes that lasted for quite a while. And that was I think an indicator that this was something that people needed to be able to do. There's a bit of almost like somewhere, like probably a little bit of catharsis, and because so many great ideas were kind of dropped that day, getting to there's riding a bit of a high on that.
Yeah, just sort of unpacking it all at the end of the day. I really like the idea of sort of isolation, and then this being a bit of an antidote to that, and that certainly was my experience I went from at Sharethrough, at my current company, went from being a peer to an engineering manager, and that it's a little bit of a weird transition for a lot of reasons. But one thing that struck me even a year or two out was that it was very difficult to find other people you could confide in other than your direct manager, where there's already that's a specific relationship. So I think that's it. It was very sort of a palpable feeling of relief to just be able to have these semi-anonymous chats with people and share your story.
That makes a good point. At a company small enough to not really have onboarding for new managers who are coming from the individual track to a management track, we created a cohort.
Oh, nice.
Like a one-day cohort.
Oh, that's a really good idea. Yeah. Cool. So what was different from last year's Calibrate, maybe in terms of what the overall theme was, or just sort of how it went down?
There's a couple. One, we about doubled the size of the audience, of the attendees. Per Sonya's suggestion, we increased the duration of the breaks, which I think the interesting thing is no matter how much we increase them by, and we also extended the happy hour by an hour, it's still not long enough. As with last year, when happy hour was ending, we were getting kind of nudged by the event team at our venue that, all right, you need to kind of start wrapping up. And there's still, 170 people came, and there's still probably 30 there after 2 hours.
Right, yeah.
So, longer time to talk was one, more attendees was one. One of the things, Sonya, that we didn't talk about specifically might be different is, for those folks who don't know, Sonya handled all of the speaker recruitment this year, and I handled it last year. And the way that I did it last year, it was, even though it wasn't a CFP, because a CFP is tough to do for a new conference, it probably felt like a CFP in that it was more of just meeting a speaker, letting them know what the conference was, who we were trying to help, and why. And then it was sort of carte blanche of like, this is the audience. You were once a new engineering manager. What do you think is important for folks to hear? And right. I think based on the how much more, I think both year conferences were great. I think this year the talks were very cohesive.
Right.
The first year this year they felt a little more cohesive with more of an established arc.
Yeah.
And so I'd be curious to know from Sonya if there were differences in how she approached speakers.
Well, one of the cool things, this is kind of like the making of Calibrate 2016. We started with asking ourselves, what do we want to have a theme for this year? How do we want to make this year different as far as the speakers go? And through a little working group who were talking about it, we came up with the idea that really finding people who are able to perform the role of speaker, but who have experience in this, and asking them similar to the first year of asking them what's important, but limiting it to, or like focusing it to, what's something that you are passionate about, because that makes for a good speaker experience anyway, that you would love to share with new engineering managers. Right. These all being people who in some way or another are helping and encouraging new engineering managers on a regular basis. So kind of like we started with, actually, this was a good learning moment. We started with kind of like, what's your superpower, as a way of, like, what's the thing that you think about? What's the thing you kind of like, you end up taking notes on, or you could talk about forever with somebody, nerding it out about onboarding, or about, how to have hard conversations, or whatever it is. Though it turns out asking someone what's your superpower is kind of an intimidating question. So I learned something useful in trying to help people feel comfortable with being, like, owning the fact that they're totally an expert, and we want to hear that. But that's how we got the talks that we have. And there's a little bit of talking with speakers. Some folks came, like, immediately had an answer. Oh yeah. This is the thing that I know. Like Michael. Well, there were a number of Michaels. Michael R.
Yep. Ruggiero. Yep.
Yeah. He's like super into one-on-ones. Like, if ever there's a blog post on one-on-ones that goes by, he nabs it and reads it. Like, that's a good indicator that he is a good person to talk about doing those well. Which is also happens to be one of the things that, as a new engineering manager, is probably either not something that you're ever told about, or like the proto way of doing it may not be as helpful as they could be. Right. And so you can kind of skip ahead 5 or 6 spaces on the board game of career growth by figuring out something that works well, especially with these talks being made to show generally how things can work, but then leaving a framework for you to take, and you to make what works for you, what works for your team, what works for your company.
Yeah. How important do you think frameworks are for new managers?
I think frameworks are a really good way of bringing some quick scaffolding. I think they can be, like anything can be misused. Like everything can be misused. Agile can be misused. Ruby can be misused. So it's a little bit of the right kind of framework, which is not something as a new engineering manager you may know yet. You'll only have hindsight on that. But and then a little bit of help and guidance on how to use it well, how to apply it. What are you misinterpreting of it? What are the parts that don't work for you, but you could change and do something that does work for you?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, Michael Lopp uses the word rubric in his talk. He talks about finding a rubric that you can use to make decisions against for a new manager, because so much of what you're dealing with is exceptional. I have a particular technology decision that I'm helping some engineers talk through, or I have to figure out the seating chart for the next office we're moving to, like all these things that you'd never expect. And so, people, I think, can struggle to find ways to work through the new challenges they have, because none of them appear similar in any way.
Right.
And so finding a way, and just like a design pattern, right? Like if you were to ask an engineer, why are design patterns good? They'd say, because I don't want to keep solving the same problem from scratch over and over again. I want to rely on the wisdom of these people who've done this.
Right.
Thinking about frameworks as like management design patterns of like, I've seen a similar-ish type of problem. It was in a different area of management, but I think some of the principles might still be the same here. Sonya's phrase of quick scaffolding, I think, couldn't be any more accurate. Just giving you something, giving you a little bit of a North Star to say, I've never dealt with this situation before. Somebody else probably has dealt with something similar. And if there's a rough framework that I could use to help me work my way through this decision that has context that's unique to me, that's why you need a framework and not a recipe, because your ingredients will be different. I think that is a really good way to get some quick scaffoldings and to give you a shot at working through it, yourself, without having to derive everything from first principles.
Yeah, a lot of I think that's totally true, and I think a lot of the talks did revolve around had that as some part of the idea. of the main idea of the talk, where including a framework, or how you develop a framework, or how you sort of get it from somewhere else.
That was an active goal of ours to provide everyone who came so they could leave. Well, so like ideally everyone left with something they could implement on Monday.
Got it.
If they so choose, if it worked for them, and to have a set of things that they could begin to start to work in, and right, having a quick scaffolding. And I guess the other way of thinking about but you also understand why you're doing this. So you're not just implementing a scaffolding. You're like, well, I guess it's going to be rectangular. You understand some of the reason behind it, so that way you can implement it properly.
Yeah.
And I think having having the speakers kind of go back and forth on those. So the opening talk this year was very much a tactical talk of I think it was Michael Lopp's 10 management hacks, I think he called them, or leadership hacks.
Yeah.
But they were very focused on tactics. Be 2 minutes early to every meeting. Like, that's a thing that I can go back to work tomorrow and start doing. But to Sonya's point, it doesn't end at, okay, I'm just going to do that. Why are you being 2 minutes early? Right? And he explains that in his talk. And so I think that having the speakers also know that, that's what we're looking to do, means that as they're putting their talks together, they can say, okay, is this, they need to leave with something.
Right.
And it's I either gave them a list of things they can go back and do right away, or a list of frameworks of ways that they can inject their own context in and solve their own problems.
Right. That makes sense, and it did feel like it was curated. I really liked the talks last year, especially because I was part of it. But this year did feel more as a cohesive theme, which I think is probably just also second year of doing a conference. You have a little bit more. I feel like a lot of just the nuts and bolts were less, were more familiar, so you could kind of focus a little bit more on the content.
Yeah, but also because Sonya was amazing. I mean, that the amount of effort that went into working with the speakers to ensure that, I think can't be understated. I mean, that's as much 99% of Sonya's work as it is anything else.
Nice.
Hey.
Great. So do you see this as an annual thing? Like, will we see another one next year?
The website's already up.
Oh, great. Well, there you go.
If you go to calibratesf.com, at this moment, you would see the words 2017.
Okay. Well, there's your answer. That's great.
Yeah.
If any of what we've been talking about, any of these sorts of challenges about, being uncertain about, your day-to-day, or what, what a good day looks like, started from scratch again. And even though you're an engineering manager, the word engineering is in there. And so we sometimes think that, it's engineering management. That won't be that bad. It's just managing people who are just like me. It is that bad. I mean, it's that good. It's that challenging. So if if you're going through this challenge, if these are the kinds of things that you're working through, and you want to be with people who are going through similar things and hear from people who have gone through them, then you might want to consider coming to Calibrate this year.
Okay. Well, Rob and Sonya, thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
No, it was great to talk about it, as I will always feel.
Yes, I'm so happy to talk about it more and to see Sonya. I haven't seen Sonya much since the first conference, or the second conference ended. Thank you, Peter. This is great, and thank you, Sonya.